welcome everyone to a time of reflection on the encyclical of Pope Francis, Fratelli Tutti. Welcome all of you. And we really want it to be a time of reflection and not too many words. So we'll kick off with our opening chant.
Let us be renewed by God's mercy. Let us be loved by Jesus. Let us enable the power of his love to transform our lives too. And let us become agents of this mercy, channels through which God can water the earth, protect all creation, and make justice and peace flourish.
The title of this encyclical translates to all brothers and sisters, a fitting title for discussing fraternity and social friendship with reflections on the way of life of St. Francis of Assisi, who prefers a life which was built on a foundation of love that transcends the barrier of geography and distance. St. Francis of Assisi is described as an individual who lived and walked a life like Jesus, bringing love and peace to those he walked among, such as the poor, the abandoned, and outcasts, what we are all called to do as Christians. The first chapter focuses on many things that hindered the development of universal fraternity. I was reading it situated in the university, and I have to say it was very grounding. I always feel very grateful for everything I have, the country I live in, the people I know. I could go on, and I think sometimes that leaves me in a state of oblivion to the things that are happening in the lives of my sisters and brothers as part of the human family. I think we could look at problems going on around the world as human issues and not just as a country or community or city issue. It leads us to view these problems very much as existence and challenge to spread the peace and love within ourselves into the lives of others for the glory of God. The problems discussed are problems that I was aware of, but the reality of them seemed distant to the relatively sheltered life that I live, which I'm sure a majority of people in this room would agree with. Problems such as isolation of all forms of communities and individuals. I think isolation is a big problem because it implies the lack of ability or access to draw energy from interaction with others. Although we can fill our lives with interaction on screens, they lack the physical gestures and all else which comes as part of human communication in person. What the Pope says about digital relationships not being sufficient to unite humanity is true in many forms. True connectivity comes from being physically present. However, I also look at digital connectivity as being very useful in my connection to people back home in South Africa and to allow me to have knowledge of what's going on around the world and how I could help. However, the Pope doesn't just talk about isolation in this sense, but adds on and talks about the end of historical consciousness as due to the isolation of the elderly. We fail to realize that by isolating the elderly and leaving them in the care of others without closeness and concern of family members, we disfigure and impoverish the family itself. We also end up depriving young people of necessary connection to their roots and a wisdom that the young cannot achieve on their own. As a young person, I believe who I am, who I will be, and who I have been is built greatly upon ancestry and past teaching, and I have so much to learn from older generations. Their experiences and knowledge and their strive towards living a life of faith in Jesus, but also in terms of stories being told and time being spent for character building or enjoyment, is something I can greatly benefit from. Not only is it a benefit to me, but to us, to love, care, and cherish our elderly, it is a benefit to them. The wealthy are becoming wealthier and the poor are becoming poorer, creating even more isolation. The economy promotes individual interest and weakens the communitarian dimensions of life. Yet, we need to think of ourselves more and more as a single family, dwelling in a common home. Because it saves time and money to throw things in the landfill rather than reuse or recycle or compost them. That's what we do. Water companies and cosmetic companies are still making their products from plastic. We have grown indifferent to all kinds of wastefulness, starting with the waste of food. We need to take greater care of our world, and that's going to take effort. Firstly, to convince those in power, but also to support those efforts being made and to embrace positive changes that are being made. The first chapter also discusses problems which stem from the fact that some humans think they're better than others, and some humans don't deserve to be treated at least as humans. And this comes in the form of racism, lack of human rights, terrorism. I could go on and on. They show that, I suppose, social progression is not as real or as definitive as we think, especially when some of them don't cost a thing. For example, it doesn't cost anything to not be racist, but some people are. So, however, it will take effort to fight against these things, and as Christians, we are called to do this. I believe in our strive towards living a life more like Jesus, we have to seek out justice, seek to serve, and seek to respect others as Jesus did. As the Pope said, once we realize that no one is saved alone, we can only be saved together as a world. We will become a better community and fraternity will be increased. And this point was wonderfully demonstrated as the COVID pandemic hit in New Zealand, when the dwellers of New Zealand all came together to diminish the virus in the community. I believe to fight the problems in society today, we need to view the problems which happen in faraway lands as well as problems that are happening to our neighbours, as happening to ourselves, which is extremely useful in situations whereby we are capable of fighting against these problems and striving for awareness and change. The chapter ends with the promise of discussion of hope in future chapters. God continues to sow abundant seeds of goodness in our human family. Hope fills the heart, the Pope says. You could look at these problems and view them as opportunities for change, or they could make you hopeless, which I don't think was the aim of this chapter. There's a sense of hope that comes as being part of a church community and having faith. And I think I would not have the same understanding of this chapter if I didn't have faith. I see and feel God through the interactions I have with people on a day-to-day basis, on the sounds made by natural and man-made products, on textures. When I stand on ground, I feel in contact with all of God's creation because of gravity and the earth that connects us all as human beings. I'd like to finish with Colossians chapter 3, verse 14. Above all, clothe yourselves with love, which binds everything together in perfect harmony. A reminder that love for God and our neighbours as ourselves is the way, has been the way, and will be the way.
My reflection was on chapter 2 of Fratelli Tutti, and it was headed, "A Stranger on the Road." Pope Francis declares his intention to devote this encyclical to fraternity and social friendship as espoused by St. Francis of Assisi, when he called for his brothers and sisters to follow the Gospels and show love in a way that transcends all boundaries and expresses fraternal openness to all who share our earth. In chapter 2, Pope Francis uses what is commonly referred to as the Good Samaritan parable as his context. He shared this story in response to a question from an inquisitive lawyer who asked, perhaps a little smugly, "What must I do to inherit life?" Jesus' reply was, "You must love your God as yourself and love with your body and soul, and you must love your neighbour as yourself." In finishing his reply with "love your neighbour as yourself," this brought about another question: who is my neighbour? Jesus told the Samaritan story in response to this parable, and he ended the Samaritan story with, "Who do you think is a good neighbour?" And the answer being, the one who showed mercy. It's not what we would regard as a response that would come in a worldly atmosphere that we live in. He goes on to reinforce that we are not called to live inwardly looking, solitary lives. Abel in the early Old Testament asked, "Am I my brother's keeper?" I feel that we are being asked to dissolve boundaries, not build walls, around ourselves, our families, our neighbourhoods, our ideologies, our assets and our resources. God encourages us to live in a brother and sisterhood, resolving our conflicts, attending to the needs when we encounter them, creating a universal culture of care and cooperation. We are to reach heaven as a member of a community, as contributors, encouragers, people of service, and as a part of a collective. In the New Testament, there are several examples of a call to fraternal love. In John chapter 1, those who do not love a brother or a sister whom they have seen cannot love God whom they have not seen. Whoever loves a brother or a sister lives in the light, but whoever hates another believer is living in the darkness. The Good Samaritan, when he attended to the man he came upon, who incidentally was not aligned to him culturally or politically, gave this man his resources and, more importantly, his time. He saw the needs of a historical enemy as deserving of his time and attention. He followed the Levite and the priest, who both hurried on, ignoring the needs of the injured man. Pope Francis asks, who in this story do we associate with? He says we have become accustomed to looking the other way, passing by, and ignoring situations until they affect us directly. He says we do not have to look far to see ourselves in all participants in this story. Each day, we need to decide whether to be the Good Samaritan or the indifferent bystander. Am I the robber? Do I have a sense of entitlement? Am I greedy? Do I look around at the possessions of others and covet them? Or did my life's journey and experience affect the foundations of my conscience and allow me to think that what I was doing was not evil. Am I the Levite? Too busy, too preoccupied, too important, too scared? Pope Francis acknowledges that we need to not ignore the fact that the priest was a representative of the religious, and he too was not able to give his time or attention to those who need it. Yesterday, after having done this, I found myself in a dilemma which I didn't solve properly and which is still on my mind. I went to the local Foursquare store in my car, got out of the car, and to my left is a person with crutches, looking bewildered and calling out to passers-by for money. I hurried into the Foursquare, got my things, came back. I didn't deem it sensible or appropriate to give the lady money, so I smiled at her and said, "Have a nice day," and I got in my car and drove away. I reflected later that I did nothing to improve her day at all. I made judgments that maybe were not accurate, but I didn't help her in any way. Today we have a great opportunity to express a sense of fraternity, to be good Samaritans who bear the struggles of others and try to create a supportive community. Pope Francis talks about small steps. Start at a local level. As the last chapter ended, it says, maintain a sense of hope. Be prayerful, be prepared. Jesus asks us to be present in those in need, with which our energy, our resources, our spirit, our community leads us to be like this. Don't build walls. A return to the idea of the common good, which he espouses as not being so common today. In his lifetime, we've moved on from knowing our neighbour, helping our neighbour, sharing with our neighbour, to an indifference and to a spirit of individualism and looking after ourselves. So he calls for a return to this common good, and he calls for it in the name of Jesus, our Redeemer.
Living God, however poor our prayer is, we search for you with confidence. And your love carves out a way forward through our hesitations and even through our doubts. Amen.